Would you believe me if I told you that a single phone call destroyed a 15-year marriage, emptied $300,000 from a joint account, and there were still people who thought she was right? Well, that's exactly what happened. One wife, 3 girlfriends, a trip to Europe, and everything changed. What seemed like just a harmless getaway turned into a script of betrayal, revenge, and heartbreak on an international scale. But the most shocking part wasn't the escape or the Italian lover. It was the return. Because no one expects that after burning everything down, someone might come back begging for scraps. Julia had been married to Marcos for 15 years. 2 kids, a comfortable house, a life that looked stable from the outside. But behind the social smiles, there was a growing silence. They didn't talk like they used to, and every Wednesday night felt like a repeat of the last. When she asked to go on a trip to Europe with her friends, Marcos didn't think twice. He said she deserved it. And more than that, he transferred part of their savings to her card, a gesture of trust that would cost him dearly. The trip started in Lisbon. 3 friends, port wine, selfies on the staircases, loud laughs. Julia looked relaxed, but inside, she felt something different. An old emptiness started to change shape. It wasn't sadness anymore. It felt like a dangerous kind of freedom, the kind of feeling that turns discomfort into clarity. Just hours after leaving Brazil, she no longer felt like a wife. She felt like a woman again. And that might sound subtle, until it changes everything. Marcos, back in Brazil, stuck to his routine. Work, the kids, grocery shopping on Saturdays. He was sure Julia would return refreshed, full of stories, with a smile on her face. And yes, the smile would come, but for an entirely different reason. The joint account meant for their kids' future was now funding fancy dinners, tourist outings, designer clothes, and something else he didn't know about, an emotional shift. Julia didn't feel homesick anymore. What she felt was stronger, the urge not to come back. It's funny how betrayal can start with tiny gestures. A message left unread, an "I love you" answered with a thumbs-up emoji. During the trip, Julia started replying to Marcos with short, cold, robotic messages. He sensed something was off but said nothing. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of pride. And that's where the danger lives. Silence is the most fertile ground for hate to grow. And once hate takes root, it brings with it a thirst for revenge, even when there's no clear target yet. As the days passed, her friends started to notice the shift. Julia was different, more concerned with her looks, glued to her phone, less present in the group chats. No one could pinpoint exactly what was happening, but their eyes said it all. She smiled with that look of someone hiding a secret and enjoying it. And when cheating stops being an emotional slip and becomes a conscious choice, there's no turning back. Julia had already crossed that line, even if she hadn't fully realized it. It was in that euphoric state, disguised as freedom, that she ran into a certain Italian man at a small street restaurant. The kind of man who shows up out of nowhere, like a character from a movie you dreamed about once. She laughed at a joke, and he responded in heavily accented Portuguese. What should have been just a friendly dinner turned into the spark for a story filled with disillusionment, bitterness, and a thirst for revenge still in the making. His name was Luca. Italian, early 40s, confident smile, and eyes that seemed to read your soul. He was a chef, but the kind who understood people better than recipes. Within 2 conversations, he had mapped out all of Julia's weak spots: emotional loneliness, a cold marriage, and the desperate craving to feel alive again. What started as a casual chat turned into a candlelit dinner on a hidden hotel balcony in Alfama. And that's where something more dangerous than cheating was born: idealization. Luca was everything Marcos wasn't. While her husband spoke little, the Italian charmed her with stories about travel, aromas, music, and wine. He felt like he came straight from a movie. A man quoting Neruda, dancing in the street, saying things like, "You deserve more than a life of sacrifice." Julia, who had only been flirting with freedom until then, dove in head first. It wasn't the touch or the kiss, it was the feeling of being truly seen, something marriage hadn't given her in years. That's when disillusionment became a decision. Every passing day, Julia drifted further from her friends. She spent hours with Luca, in tucked-away cafes, open-air markets, scenic overlooks by the Tagus. It was like she was living a parallel life, a version of herself that had never made it back to Brazil. And here's the thing. When someone feels so at home inside a fantasy, it usually means their reality was unbearable long before. The affair in that case wasn't a detour. It was the cheapest way out of a pain she had refused to confront. Back in Brazil, Marco still had no clue what was coming. He was still the man who trusted, who took care of the kids, who eagerly waited for travel pictures. What he didn't know was that Julia wasn't sending him photos anymore. Now it was selfies with Luca, posted to private stories visible only to two close friends. It felt like living in a delicious secret. But any secret, when fed with irresponsibility, turns into poison. And poison, sooner or later, always comes back for its host. Julia started to imagine herself living in Europe. "What if I stayed?" she asked Luca one night, as the city lights whispered promises in the breeze. He didn't say yes or no. He just smiled, poured more wine, and whispered, "The world's too small to live sad." That was enough. The thought turned into a plan. The plan became certainty. And when desire mixes with escape, the outcome usually arrives wrapped in emotional tragedy. That was the moment Julia made the decision that would forever change not just her life, but everyone else's too. That same week, Luca took her to Paris. It wasn't just another trip. It was the breaking point of everything still tied to her past. Julia no longer thought about her husband or even the kids. She only wanted to extend the fantasy. She thought she was living out a European love story, but in reality, she was walking straight into an emotional trap disguised as a dream. And while she plunged deeper into that new world, she didn't see what some decisions cost. Not in dollars, but in destruction. And that cost was about to be collected. In a hotel room in Paris, with a partial view of the Eiffel Tower and her head full of promises, Julia logged into the joint bank account for the first time. The password? Still the same. Marcos had never changed it. His trust was as big as his naivete. In just a few clicks, she saw the $320,000 they had saved. Money earned through years of sacrifice, effort, and family planning. Right there, between the hotel luxury and Luca's slow breathing behind her, she made the boldest decision of her life. She transferred $300,000 and decided to start over. She didn't tell anyone. Not even her friends knew about the transfer. She emailed the confirmation to herself, then deleted it from her phone. The plan was simple. Use the money to buy a small apartment, invest in something local, and with Luca by her side, rebuild a new version of herself. She honestly believed love and guts were enough. But when passion pairs up with impulsiveness, reason disappears. Where there used to be caution, there was now just a blind urge to break away from everything. At this point, the affair was no longer a detour. It had become the new road. Julia, who once saw herself as a victim of a dull marriage, was now the author of a cold, calculated escape. There was no goodbye, no conversation, no, let's try. Just silence. And silence, in this case, cuts deeper than screaming. The pain of betrayal doesn't come just from the act, but from being abandoned. When someone you love just switches off the lights and walks away, what's left behind is a kind of hate that eats you alive, from both sides. In the days that followed, she went all in on the plan. She opened a bank account in France using temporary documents, exchanged messages with a real estate agent, even considered opening a small bistro with Luca. Life seemed to be smiling at her, but she ignored the fact that it was all being built on quicksand. The heartbreak hadn't arrived yet, but it was already headed her way. And as it often goes in real-life revenge stories, the punishment comes just when your ego's at its peak. That was the phase where Julia stopped looking back. Marcos, still clueless, kept making plans for her return. He talked with the kids about their mom coming back, thought about taking her to dinner at her favorite restaurant. What he didn't know was that the woman he loved had already taken from him not just the money, but the trust, the structure, the shared dream. The betrayal, in this case, was twofold, emotional and financial. And few things are as devastating as being stabbed in the back by the person who was supposed to protect you. Julia, even after crossing the line, didn't show any regret. She believed she was following her heart, a phrase far too pretty to justify an emotional and financial theft. The truth is, when someone tries to start over by stepping on the rubble of others, The future usually charges interest, and even though everything seemed under control at that moment, a storm was already forming, and she had no idea how easily the dream world she created could come crashing down, just like that wire transfer. The call came on a regular Tuesday late afternoon. Marcos was home, making dinner for the kids when his phone rang with an international number. He picked up without hesitation, already smiling from the anticipation. On the other end, Julia was cold, almost robotic. She didn't ask about the kids, didn't ask how he was. She went straight to the point. She said she wasn't coming back, that she had fallen in love with a man in Europe, and yes, she had transferred the money from their joint account. It was my share too, she said. Marcos stayed silent. He didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't beg. The shock was so deep his body went into emotional shutdown. As he listened to her cutting words, he stared at the stove like he had to remind himself the rice was still cooking. She spoke as if she were canceling a gym membership, not ending a 15-year marriage. That wasn't just betrayal. It was emotional murder. Cold, calculated, and unapologetic. The disillusionment hit instantly. Julia hung up the call like ending a Zoom meeting. Her final words were, "I hope one day you understand." And that's what stings the most. The tone of someone who thinks they're doing something necessary, as if the other person's pain is just a footnote. Marcos, still silent, ended the call and took a deep breath. He knew there was nothing left to save, but he also knew that when someone uses trust as a weapon, revenge stops being a choice and becomes a form of internal justice. It didn't take long for him to walk into the home office. Behind the cabinet, there was a safe with documents and encrypted backups. Marcos wasn't just any guy. He was a cybersecurity analyst, methodical, discreet, strategic. Even with a broken heart, his mind stayed sharp. The betrayal wouldn't break him. He wasn't going to be another silent victim of a selfish choice. And at that moment, something inside him shifted. The pain turned into action. And action, when fueled by heartbreak, is always ruthless. Meanwhile, Julia kept posting photos with Luca on her private stories, as if nothing had happened. She had no idea that, across the ocean, the man she abandoned was already drawing up a silent counterattack. This is when time becomes an ally to those who wait with intelligence. And Marcos knew he didn't need to rush. All he had to do was watch. Because when someone steals your peace, the best revenge is served with balance and cold precision. From that moment on, revenge stopped being just a theory. That night, Marcos didn't sleep. Not from sadness, but from planning. He reviewed bank statements, account access, activated trackers. He began organizing folders of evidence, chat logs, bank transfers, screenshots. The betrayal hurt, yes, but the rage that followed wasn't blind, it was disciplined. And when pain turns into discipline, the ending never favors the one who ran thinking they'd get away with it. Julia thought she had won. Little did she know she'd only lit the fuse on something much bigger. Julia believed she was a step ahead, that she had shocked Marcos, that her escape to Europe was a bold, almost poetic move. What she didn't know was that her husband had been suspicious for weeks. He had noticed the subtle changes, the distance, the vague excuses, the empty looks during video calls. It wasn't just intuition, it was behavioral analysis. And when intuition joins logic, betrayal becomes just another predictable variable. Marcos had already done his homework. As a cybersecurity expert, he had created a dummy account to protect the family's real savings. What Julia could access was just a portion of the funds, a well-crafted trap. Every one of her moves was being tracked in real time. He didn't stop the transfer. On the contrary, he let it happen. Because sometimes the best way to prove betrayal is to let the betrayer show just how far they'll go when they think they're in control. During the week after that call, Marcos gathered all the evidence, screenshots, bank logs, voice messages, even Luca's approximate location. He didn't act out of blind rage. He moved with precision. The disillusionment he felt had already turned into fuel for something greater, emotional and financial justice. And let's be honest, there's a kind of revenge more effective than direct confrontation, reclaiming your dignity and exposing the truth with cold, undeniable facts. It cuts deep, without leaving a mark. While Julia wandered the Tuscan alleys with Luca, Laughing and taking photos for her new beginning scrapbook, Marcos was sitting down with his lawyer. The lawsuit would be clean, fast, and surgical. Besides divorce, he'd file for misappropriation of funds, financial misconduct, and potential child abandonment. The kind of action that doesn't just end a marriage, it tarnishes a reputation. Because betrayal isn't just emotional. It's moral, social, and in many cases even criminal. He also thought of the kids. He wrote a letter to each one sealed to be opened in the future. There was no hatred in those letters, just truth. Marcos knew that exposing their mother could hurt them, but hiding the truth could cause even more damage later. It's the kind of dilemma only someone who's been deeply betrayed can understand. That moment when you realize love must take a back seat, because protecting those who stayed is more urgent than mourning the one who left. In Marcos's mind, the game had already flipped. He wasn't after revenge for revenge's sake. He wanted balance. He knew life would collect the debts in due time. Julia's cold tone on that call still echoed in his head. But now, without pain, only focus. Because when someone rips everything from you without even looking back, the best thing you can do is grow so much that their absence becomes irrelevant. And soon, Julia's absence would be the least of her problems. Julia's fantasy started to crack exactly where she felt safest, in Luca's arms. When they reached the Amalfi Coast, the promises started to shift. The apartment he was going to rent, gone from the conversation. The dream of opening a restaurant, radio silence. Romantic dinners turned into arguments about money. Luca, once charming and seductive, began showing signs of impatience. And when she pressed him, he claimed he was under pressure. But the truth was way crueler than Julia could imagine. She didn't start getting truly suspicious until she got a strange call from an Italian number. A woman asked if she was Luca's new victim. Julia hung up immediately, thought it was a prank. But 2 days later, the truth began to sink in. Luca had left that morning saying he needed to handle a bank issue and never came back. He took what little cash was left, the watch she bought in Paris, and even her main credit card from her purse. It was the perfect con, and she was the perfect mark, vulnerable, in love, and unaware. The French bank froze her account after detecting suspicious activity, declined cards, unanswered calls, unread messages. Julia went from glowing muse to dead weight in 48 hours. She had to sell a designer bag just to pay for 2 nights at the hotel. With no passport, Luca had been keeping it safe, and not speaking the local language, she turned to the Brazilian consulate. And it was there, sitting in a cold office with a staffer unmoved by her tears, that it finally hit her. The betrayal she inflicted on Marcos had returned with sharper teeth. Julia tried reaching out to the friends from her trip, but all she got was silence. Some already knew what had happened and didn't want to be involved. Others stayed quiet, maybe from shame, maybe from judgment. The heartbreak came crashing in like an avalanche. That love she thought was fresh, pure, liberating, had just been a trap in disguise. A classic scam: seduce, isolate, consume, vanish. And while she scraped together the courage to ask for help, the image that haunted her most wasn't Luca's. It was her kids, the ones she left behind without even looking back. Alone, heavy with guilt and self-loathing, Julia wandered the streets ashamed of even the wind on her face. The free, bold, spontaneous woman was gone. In her place, only someone shattered, lost, and unforgiven remained. And the cruelest part? She knew no one was to blame but herself. The betrayal she planted didn't bear fruit, only thorns. And now, with no money, no support, and no dignity, one question kept echoing in her mind. How do you return to a life you burned with your own hands? The consulate arranged her return, and she already knew what hell it would be to face Marcos again. But the worst part wasn't fear. It was shame. She knew he probably knew everything by now. Still, she had to come back. Because even revenge, when done right, demands the victim return to the scene of the crime. And Julia knew that when she landed, there'd be no home, no husband, no respect, no comfort waiting. But what she didn't yet know was just how much more brutal her return would be than any blow she'd taken so far. When Julia landed back in Brazil, there was no one waiting at the gate. No flowers, no hug, no forgiveness. She got a cab with the little cash she had left and went straight to the house she'd lived in for over a decade. But when she rang the doorbell, she was met not by Marcos, but by an automated message on the intercom. This residence is now under new management. He had changed the system, locked the gates, even removed her name from the mailbox. The humiliation was instant and devastating. She tried texting him. All she got back was a screenshot of the divorce filing and the embezzlement lawsuit. Marcos didn't write a single word. There was no room for conversation. To him, the betrayal was no longer up for debate. It was a closed case, now handled in court. And you know what hurts more than hate? Indifference. Julia, once the queen of that house and the heartbeat of that routine, was now just a stranger on the sidewalk, holding a suitcase and a plastic bag with an airport sandwich. She tried calling her kids, texted, begged, even asked an aunt to help, but no one responded. Marcos had planned everything. The boys were in therapy, cared for, safe, but protected. No exposure, no forced contact. Julia realized she hadn't just lost her husband, she had lost the trust of her children. And that kind of heartbreak doesn't heal with time. It only heals with redemption. But here's the problem. At that moment, she didn't even have a place to sleep. Betrayers rarely factor in the cost of rebuilding. Out of options, she moved in with a distant aunt deep in the suburbs. A small room, no air conditioning, a worn-out mattress on the floor, and a fan that made more noise than wind. Julia, who just weeks before had been dining in Capri with imported wine, now ate rice and eggs and shared a bathroom with 4 other people. The contrast was brutal. The betrayal felt like a distant memory, but its consequences screamed at her every time she stared at that moldy ceiling. The glamour had turned into penance, and the fall wasn't over yet. Meanwhile, Marcos kept moving forward. He lost weight, got a new haircut, started running in the park with the kids. He wasn't celebrating revenge. He was just rebuilding. Julia didn't show up in his texts, in his words, in his life. He no longer needed to say her name to feel the sting of betrayal. Because the true victory of the betrayed isn't watching the other person suffer. It's living as if they never existed. And that's exactly what Marcos chose to do. Julia spent days in silence, replaying everything. She imagined 1,000 ways to explain herself, to start over, to crawl back to some version of her old life. But that life was gone. The back door she thought she could slip through had been locked. There was no place for her anymore. And even if there was, she no longer had the key. Her name wasn't on any contracts or in anyone's smiles. And the worst part? When she thought she had lost everything, she still didn't know she'd lose what little remained. Julia now lived like a ghost of who she used to be. No assets, no family, no direction. The house she helped build was now filled with a new routine, one that didn't include her. Her social media accounts were deleted, contacts blocked, the few friends she had disappeared like smoke. Her name, once tied to vacations and fancy dinners, was now synonymous with shame. The betrayal she thought she could control became a chain around her neck, and the freedom she chased was just another illusion sold with a European accent. Luca was gone for good. No messages, no answers, just the remnants of a perfectly executed con. She tried tracking him down, emailed, called consulates, nothing. When she finally learned he'd done this to other women, her shame turned to rage. But it was useless rage because there was no one left to scream at. And in that silence, she realized the cruelest punishment of all. Being ignored by everyone who once loved you hurts more than being judged by strangers. In the divorce process, she gave up everything just to avoid trial. Marcos, cold and precise, submitted transaction records, screenshots, and a full account of the abandonment. Her lawyer suggested a settlement. She agreed, not out of courage, but from exhaustion. She couldn't pay alimony, couldn't ask for custody, couldn't even defend herself without sinking further. Her downfall wasn't just emotional, it was legal, financial, familial, and spiritual. It was the total collapse of a life built on bad choices. She kept living with her aunt indefinitely. Woke up early to clean the house, did her nephew's laundry, fed the old dog. At night, she ate alone, picking through leftovers while staring at her phone, playing that call on loop, the one where she said she wasn't coming back. I took the money. I'm not coming home. Each time she heard her own cold voice, something inside her died again. The revenge didn't come from Marcos. It came from her own conscience. A few times, she tried writing letters to her sons. She never mailed them. Deep down, she knew it wouldn't help. You can't rebuild trust with pen and paper when what was shattered was the soul of the bond. She knew they were doing fine, and that truth hurt more than any rejection. Her betrayal hadn't just ended a marriage, it shattered the very image her children had of her. And the cruelest part? Some wounds don't scar with time, because they never stop bleeding. The last image of Julia says it all. Sitting alone in a cramped kitchen under a flickering yellow light, walls peeling, staring at a plate of cold rice, while an old samba plays softly on the radio. A notification blinks on her phone. Account closed due to insufficient funds. And it wasn't just the account, it was her life. The freedom she chased had become loneliness. The love she threw away was now just memory. And the woman who once dared to start over ended up begging for crumbs from someone who was never coming back. And now tell me, how many truths are you ignoring inside your own home? How many silences are you covering up with routine, pretending everything's fine? Maybe you haven't gotten a call like Marcos did, yet. But are you sure your trust isn't already being used as a weapon? The cruelest part of betrayal isn't always the act itself. It's the blindness that comes before. So what about you? Are you going to wait until it happens to react, or are you going to start paying attention today? If this story made you think, if it turned on a light inside you, then subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and hit that like button. Because here we don't just tell stories, we deliver the warnings that most people would rather ignore.